How we doing, folks? Hey, I'm creating this video here to hopefully help some people out with an issue I've been having with this Samsung washer. My model is the WA50R5200A, and then I believe US is behind that part number. But I've had this washer for about 5 years, and recently it started throwing some codes. One was a 5C, which if you look at the manual, has several potential issues. Easiest one would be a debris filter that's clogged. Unfortunately, my model does not have a debris filter. One of the other codes it was throwing was an OC, which means water overflowed. But of course the water wasn't overflowing, so they recommend unplugging it and leaving it for a little bit, plug it back in and try it again. Before I get started on what I did with this error code, I want to kind of tell you what it was doing. So we would run a load. Sometimes it would go completely through, no problem at all. Sometimes when we start a load and we come in and press the start button, the pump would immediately start running, and it would never stop running until it threw that 5C code or that OC code, and then we had to unplug it. Sometimes we'd let it sit for 15 or 20 minutes and plug it back in, and we could finish the load. Actually start it over. Can't restart it. But when you go to start a load in this machine, the timer here should disappear, and then there will be like a dotted line of a zero sort of starting right here, and that's normal. I'll see if it does it this time. So you can see that's a normal load start. That's great. I'm going to shut it off because I don't need to start it. What it would do when the pump was running is that display would stay empty. It would not start that process, and it wouldn't start testing the drum by rotating the drum back and forth to see, to start it. And that pump would just continue to run. So that's what it was doing. Now, part of the troubleshooting on this thing, I started with the cheapest potential part, which is the pressure switch. There's a switch that's up behind the control housing here that has a rubber tube that runs down to the drum. And when the drum fills up with water, it creates a pressure on that line, and that tells the switch to stop the pump or to stop the water before it overflows. And then on the other side of that, when the pump runs and it evacuates the water from the drum, it tells the computer in here, the control board, when the drum is empty so it can stop the pump. Well, that pump was never stopping. So I initially thought maybe it was that switch that's behind the control here. So I replaced that first. It was $20. That didn't fix it. So the next step was I replaced the pump, thinking maybe my pump was getting weak and it wasn't pulling all the water out. It did seem to get pretty hot, but that could be because it was running for 30 or 40 minutes at a time before it would air out. So I've come to the conclusion after running diagnostics, which you do by turning your machine on, and then you would press this delay start button until you get to 17 hours. Once you're at 17 hours, you would press and hold the start button. It's going to act like it wants to start. Just keep holding it. And eventually it'll show AS. Right? So take your hand off the start button, let it sit for a couple seconds, and then press that start button again, and it goes into diagnostic mode. What it does first is it runs the cold water. So it's checking the valves to make sure that the cold water is going to run. It'll run through a timer, it'll shut the cold water off, and then it'll go to the hot water. And once it gets both cold and hot tested, if it doesn't fail out, it'll start agitating and test that. Then it'll drain, and it'll test the drain features. And it usually, when I run this, it came back with a passing test, no problems. But after I replaced the pump, There's the hot. You can see now it's running the hot water, part of the normal test. This diagnostic mode didn't necessarily tell me what was wrong with the machine, but it identified an issue that sometimes it would fail out, and it would tell me that it was a cold water issue, that the water wasn't there. Sometimes it would tell me there was a hot water issue. One time it failed out with the drum filled with water, and it gave me a different code. And another time it told me that it couldn't pump the water out. So there was like 4 different codes that this diagnostic mode spit out to me that made me suspect that what I actually have is a bad control board. So I've ordered a new control board for this, and I'm going to install it. And I'll show you how you get access to it. It's pretty easy. It's really, once you've been in and out of this machine 10 or 15 times, it's about a 10-minute job. So I'm going to stop here or pause, and then I'll pick up when I get to the back of the machine. And this thing will be done running its diagnostics by then, and I'll be ready to do that work. Just want to show you, it's still running diagnostics. Right now it's in its test of the spin. So it's pretty close to being done, and it'll give us that little sing-songy tone that it does when a wash is completed, if everything has worked out okay. And it's fair to point out that, like I said, this diagnostic mode is not the end-all be-all to tell you exactly what's wrong with it, but in my case, it was more valuable in telling me what wasn't wrong with it, simply because every time I ran the diagnostics, I'd get a different result. Sometimes it would go through and it would clear, and I'd have no problems. Now you can see I've got the okay, everything's good to go this time. If I ran it again, it would probably error out on me. It may be a different code the next time I run it. So, anywho, I'm gonna go around the back. So, back of the machine, I've unplugged it, and I've turned the power off, obviously. You need to take off the screws here in the corner. There's gonna be one here, one in the center, one here, and one here. Those come off so that this entire assembly can come up. Now, I'm not taking the water off because those will stay on the valve, and this thing lifts up. There's a seam right here that lifts up, so you don't have to take the water off. But I would tell you, if you're kind of a clumsy person, shut the water off and take them out of there so you're not tripping over the hoses working in the back, okay? So, be right with you. So I've got the back off, right, and kind of flipped up out of the way. This is that control board. It's underneath this cover. So there's a screw here, there's a screw here, and there's a screw here. That comes off. This whole unit comes out, and then we take a small screwdriver and we pry the cover off, and we'll unplug the cables and plug them into the new one. So I've got the screws loose, and then you can see these little slots right here. This is where we're going to pry these slots gently so that we can remove the cover. Since I'm doing this myself, I'm not wanting to give anybody a seizure with my shaky hand, so I'll get back to you when I have that cover off. So there's the board as it's wired in. You can see we've got several connectors here that need to come off. We'll unplug them. We'll plug them into the new boards in the exact same spots. I'd recommend, if you're not familiar with it or comfortable with it, take a picture so that you make sure you get everything punched back down in the same spot, right? Should be pretty easy. They're all different. Okay, the new one's in. Everything's plugged back in. You'll notice these pieces of yellow tape on here. Those are the areas where that loom kind of snaps into place. It's on top. The middle one is under, and then the left one is on top again. So, I mean, just like I say, take a picture of the one you have, make sure you get in there, save yourself some hassle. All right, I'm gonna put it back together here. All right, well, the board's in, and I'm running diagnostics again to make sure everything checks out okay. And while I'm waiting, I wanted to show you something else. If you've had one of these machines for any length of time, you're probably familiar with an unbalanced load error. You could be getting the UB error or the UR error. But essentially what it's doing is as your machine is trying to spin after the wash and rinse, the drum will violently slam from one side to the other to the point where the machine knows something's wrong, so it shuts it down. So the mistake I made when I had that issue pop up was I assumed that the dampeners were bad. The thing some people call shocks. It's basically a long rod with a spring on it, right? There's not a lot to those. It's a long rod with a spring on it, and it's got a couple plastic caps and some washers on it, and they attach to the drum in all four corners of the machine from the top down to the bottom. And when the machine spins, the purpose of those things is to keep that drum from violently moving from one side to the other. Well, what happens is these dampeners come with a gel on them. It's actually called grease, but don't let that fool you. This is not your average grease. If you're a gearhead like me, you'll know this to be far different from any grease we've ever used. This stuff is so sticky. I'm convinced it's what they keep the stink inside of poop with. That's how sticky this stuff is. So before you go out and buy new dampeners, buy this tube of Nyogel. It'll cost you 20 to 25 bucks, and try that first. The reason I say that is I bought new dampeners for mine. I replaced them all. I didn't see anything wrong with the old ones. I should have trusted my judgment and sent them back, but I put them in anyway. Within 6 months, the new dampeners were doing the same thing, and now I know why. The new dampeners came with a tiny smear of this Nyogel on it, and within a few months, it wore off, and it was already doing the unbalanced load again. So don't be convinced that you bought cheap ones or the aftermarket ones are junk. Get this tube of gel before you even order those dampeners. You'll have to lift the lid up. You can do it from the top pretty easily with a pair of vice grips, grabbing the top of each one of the dampeners and dislodging them from the drum, and one at a time grease them up with this Nyogel. Don't make the mistake of listening to people tell you that they need grease. If you put grease on those, like anti-seize or any kind of like axle grease or bearing grease, it will get worse. That's not what is designed to go on these dampeners. It needs to be this Nyogel. All right, so I know this video, I didn't take that apart because I'm not ready to do those again, but you can find videos out there on this washing machine and others that show people taking those dampeners out. And get this gel. That will probably fix your issue unless you find one that's broken. All right? Well, the machine's ready to go through a few cycles, so I think this one's repaired. But I wanted to let everybody know that it's not always as easy as a debris filter. This one doesn't have it. And I started with the cheapest part first and worked my way up to the control board. If you order one of these new, that control board's $297. Sorry, not putting $297 into a 5-year-old machine, so I bought one off of eBay that came with a guarantee for about 60 bucks. So anyway, good luck. Have a good one.